This is the Socialist World YouTube channel. Last week, the United States government spoke with unusual candor about what it is doing and where it intends to go. No diplomatic language, no pretense of peace, just the raw language of empire. On Thursday, April 24th, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth stood at a Pentagon podium and declared, "Our blockade is growing and going global. No one sails from the Strait of Hormuz to anywhere in the world without the permission of the United States Navy." 34 ships have already been turned back. 2 Iranian tankers have been seized on the high seas, one in the Bay of Bengal, between India and the Strait of Malacca, thousands of kilometers from the Persian Gulf. The USS George H.W. Bush, carrying 5,000 sailors and 3 guided missile destroyers, has entered the war zone as the 3rd Aircraft Carrier Strike Group. Together, the 3 carrier groups now hold more than 200 combat aircraft and 15,000 sailors and Marines. A further 4,200 Marines are due with the Boxer Amphibious Ready Group before the end of April. The Financial Times has described this as the largest U.S. naval buildup in the Middle East since 2004. On the same day, Trump posted an order on Truth Social directing the U.S. Navy to shoot and kill Iranian boats in the Strait of Hormuz, citing allegations, without any independent confirmation, that Iran is laying mines. This is the situation the working class faces today, and to understand it fully, we must look beyond the immediate theater of war. What is the real target? The war on Iran has never been simply about Iran. Iran is a stepping stone, a strategic rehearsal, for what American imperialism regards as the central conflict of the 21st century, war against China. Every development last week makes that explicit. The tanker seized in the Bay of Bengal, the MT Tiffany, was not heading to some obscure port. It was carrying approximately 2 million barrels of Iranian crude oil bound for Chinese refineries. On the same day as its seizure, the U.S. Treasury Department imposed sweeping secondary sanctions on Hinkley Petrochemical, a major private refinery in the Chinese port of Dalian, with a processing capacity of around 400,000 barrels per day. The Treasury also sanctioned 40 shipping companies and froze $344 million in cryptocurrency wallets used by Iranian oil intermediaries. The meaning is clear. The blockade of Iran is simultaneously an energy blockade of China. China is the largest buyer of Iranian crude, dependent on Iran for more than 10% of its total oil supply. By seizing tankers in the Indian Ocean and sanctioning Chinese refineries, the United States is not merely fighting Iran, it is strangling China's energy supply lines. The Chinese embassy in Washington said the sanctions undermine international trade order and rules and infringe upon the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese companies. Washington was unmoved. Hegseth declared the blockade is going global and will be enforced in any ocean. General Dan Kane, the top U.S. military officer, addressed ship operators worldwide with a direct warning: if you do not comply with this blockade, we will use force. The Center for Strategic and International Studies last week reported that the U.S. has burned through more than 60% of its pre-war Patriot interceptor stockpile, with each missile costing nearly $4 million. The report warned plainly, a war against a capable peer competitor like China will consume munitions at greater rates than in this war. Pre-war inventories were already insufficient. The levels today will constrain U.S. operations should a future conflict arise. This is the military logic underlying the entire war drive. Iran first, China next. The Trump administration has now openly renamed the United States Department of Defense. A defense official last week referred to it, without apparent irony, as the Department of War. Pentagon officials have been meeting with the chief executives of General Motors and Ford, Mary Barra and Jim Farley, about converting auto production to weapons manufacturing. The reason is concrete. By some estimates, it could take 5 years or more to replenish the munitions already expended in just the first 40 days of the war against Iran. The Trump administration calls this the Arsenal of Freedom project. Hegseth calls it moving from a peacetime science fair to a wartime arms race. The budget request stands at $1.5 trillion, the largest Pentagon request in U.S. history. Social spending is being gutted to pay for it. Trump has said directly, "We can't take care of daycare, Medicaid, Medicare. We have to take care of one thing, military protection. But factories and weapons alone are not enough. The ruling class needs bodies, working class bodies, and it is moving systematically to secure them. Here is a fact that deserves the full attention of every worker and young person listening, in Sri Lanka, in South Asia, and everywhere. buried inside the 2026 U.S. National Defense Authorization Act, which passed the Senate by 77 votes to 20, with full Democratic Party support, is a provision for the automatic registration of all American males aged 18 to 26 for military conscription. Beginning in December 2026, every young man in the United States will be automatically enrolled in the Selective Service System through state motor vehicle records, educational databases, Social Security numbers, tax records, and immigration data. No individual act of registration is required. The system will enroll you automatically, silently, and completely. This is not a minor administrative change. It is the infrastructure for a military draft. The logic is straightforward. The active duty U.S. military has roughly 1.3 million personnel, already stretched across global commitments. Military analysts estimate that a sustained ground campaign in Iran alone would require between 300,000 and 500,000 troops. The all-volunteer force cannot supply those numbers. Recruitment has fallen for 3 straight years. When the White House press secretary was asked whether a draft is being planned, she refused to rule it out, saying only it is not part of the current plan right now. But the president wisely keeps his options on the table. The drive toward conscription is not limited to the United States. On December 5, 2025, Germany's Bundestag passed a law requiring all 18-year-old men to complete a mandatory military questionnaire, with Defense Minister Pistorius warning that compulsory conscription will follow if voluntary numbers fall short. France has announced a voluntary military service scheme, with the country's chief of defense staff declaring publicly that France must be prepared to, in his words, lose its children in a war with Russia. What makes this even more revealing is who will be conscripted. The new system includes lawful permanent residents, asylum seekers, DACA recipients, and undocumented immigrants. The same immigrants that Trump's government has been deporting, detaining, and brutalizing will be compelled to fight and die in its wars of conquest. This is the logic of imperialism. The most oppressed sections of the working class are simultaneously the most persecuted and the most expendable. The trade union bureaucracy in the United States, specifically the United Auto Workers under Shawn Fain, is playing the role of wartime enforcer. Fain appeared in a live stream wearing a sweatshirt with a bomber logo. When Hegseth visited the Bath Iron Works naval shipyard, which builds the guided missile destroyers now deployed against Iran, local UAW leadership led chants of USA, USA. Last month, after those same Bath Iron Works workers went on strike, the bureaucracy shut it down after 5 days. Will Lehman, a Mack Trucks worker running for UAW president, stated what the working class needs to hear. War is being presented to workers as something that will bring jobs. But the reality is that workers will pay in blood. They are gearing up to send workers, and the children of workers, to fight these wars, to die for the profits of those who are exploiting workers. The ICFI and the SLLA clearly state, not a man nor a penny for imperialist war. The fight against the draft is not a matter of individual exemption. It is a class policy, irreconcilable opposition to the entire war machine of American imperialism. Let us not allow the strategic picture to obscure the human reality. Since the U.S. bombing of Iran began on February 28, the death toll has reached 3,375, including 376 children and 496 women. More than 26,500 have been wounded. 125,000 civilian buildings have been damaged or destroyed. 1.3 million jobs have been destroyed. 3.2 million people are internally displaced. In the weekend, 14 students were killed in a U.S. strike on a Tehran University dormitory. People standing in a bread queue in a vase were bombed. A Red Crescent triage station was struck. In Lebanon, 2,491 people have been killed since March 2nd. Israeli officials describe their own policy as Gazification. And last week, a sitting U.S. senator openly invoked President Truman's decision to drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki when asked whether the U.S. would need to finish the job against Iran. He described the blockade as, "We're literally starving them, both financially, and they can't feed themselves either." A senior official of the United States government is publicly advocating nuclear weapons use and deliberate mass starvation of 90 million people. The working class must understand, this is not aberration. This is the program of the class that rules the most powerful capitalist state in human history. Comrades and listeners, workers and youth of Sri Lanka and South Asia, we address you directly, because these are not distant events. The tanker seized by the U.S. Navy last week was intercepted in the Bay of Bengal. U.S. warships have already been operating in Sri Lankan waters. On March 4th, a U.S. strike sank an unarmed Iranian naval vessel off our coast, killing at least 87 sailors. The blockade that Hegseth says is going global passes directly through the sea lanes on which Sri Lanka depends for its energy, its exports, and the remittances of its overseas workers. Brent crude is now at $106 per barrel. JP Morgan projects $150 if the blockade persists. The IEA has called this the worst energy crisis in history. Sri Lanka, which imports 60% of its energy through the Strait of Hormuz, is already facing fuel rationing, electricity price increases of 40%, and the specter of a return to 2022. The Duterte government's response has been to shield U.S. imperialism while loading the costs of the crisis onto the working class. It has refused to condemn the bombing of Iran or Lebanon. It has maintained a fraudulent neutrality that places the aggressor and the victim on the same plane. It has boasted to the IMF that Sri Lanka has met all targets, meaning it has delivered fuel price increases, electricity tariff hikes, privatizations, and public sector cuts, all while the war pushes 1/4 of Sri Lanka's population below the poverty line. The JVP and PP's anti-imperialism was always demagogy. The test of a government is what it does when imperialism wages open war. This government has passed that test by lining up with Washington. Workers and youth in Sri Lanka and across South Asia must draw the following lessons and act on them. First, the enemy is not in Iran, not in China, not in Pakistan or India. The enemy is the capitalist system that produces war, austerity, and dictatorship. The working class has no interest in the conflicts of rival ruling classes and rival imperialist powers. Our solidarity is with the workers and oppressed peoples of Iran, Lebanon, Palestine, and everywhere the bombs are falling. Second, no trust can be placed in the Duterte government or in any other capitalist government in the region, including the Indian government, which is deepening its military alignment with Washington as part of the anti-China buildup in the Indo-Pacific. The Modi government's strategic partnership with the United States is the South Asian face of the same war drive. Third, the trade union leaderships, in Sri Lanka as in the United States, will not lead the fight against this war. They have demonstrated this repeatedly. What is needed is the building of independent rank-and-file committees in workplaces, plantations, universities, and communities, free from the control of the bureaucracies and the capitalist parties, to coordinate opposition to war and austerity on the basis of a unified socialist program. Fourth, the International Committee of the Fourth International and the Socialist League of Sri Lanka and South Asia demand an immediate and unconditional end to the war against Iran and Lebanon, an end to the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and the seizure of vessels on the high seas, no conversion of civilian industry to war production anywhere in the world, no military draft, not in the United States, not anywhere, the withdrawal of all U.S. and Israeli military forces from the Middle East, and the ending of the IMF austerity program that is bleeding Sri Lanka's workers to fund debt repayments to international finance capital. These are not separate demands. They are a unified program because war, austerity, and dictatorship are not separate phenomena. They are the interconnected instruments of the same ruling class. Let us sum up. The U.S. ruling class past week dropped its last pretenses. The Department of War is building an arsenal. The blockade is going global. Working class youth are being automatically registered as future cannon fodder. The target is China, and the working class of the entire world is expected to pay, in higher prices, in shattered welfare, and ultimately in blood. This is the logic of capitalism, in its epic of imperialism. The answer is socialist revolution, the international unity of the working class to overthrow the system that produces war, poverty, and barbarism. Read the latest analysis on this at wsws.org and the Socialist LK. Join the fight through the Socialist World YouTube channel. Drawing upon the World Socialist website, we analyze global political and economic developments, placing them within their broader imperialist context from a working class standpoint. We request you to listen to this podcast carefully, share it, and subscribe to the channel.